So then we are back with more understanding. So in the time of the second tabernacle services, we are refining the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzaielic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. As per then Yeshiach the prophet, the great prophet of old, he was then explaining many areas of the time of restoration, and then linked up with the Mashiach in the 24th chapter regarding reduction. Then we find areas of economics of the time of restoration prior of the autumn feast, where then we must have the proper analysis of what then the layers of Daniel of the 2nd chapter, 12th chapter, and also what the Mashiach said regarding the time of the end, those must match up properly. Daniel the prophet then stated that there is a 2nd chapter of Daniel, 12th chapter, where then the kingdoms would be divided. The set apart for a time would be mixed up with the world. That's why you read then regarding the kingdom to come government being mixed up with the world. We understand then kingdoms because then the layer of Gentiles would be separated. Why would they be separated? There are a couple of understandings. From heaven's understanding is then the decision of the statue being of iron and of clay. And then the second understanding from then the first son, because the first understanding was regarding tabernacling. Then the statue, iron and clay, and then coming the rock, and then striking the statue. The second related with the son, the first son, is then regarding the Gentile level. Why then the kingdoms would be divided? First, we then came out of the 1,000 years of deceit, where then it had to be a world order, because they had no tabernacling. However, during the time of restoration, then we are back on the agenda of the Creator. So then the economics of the future won't let those other kingdoms to become together because of the iron and clay ethical understandings of those nations or realms. It's going to be extremely disadvantageous for then the kingdoms to be united. It makes no sense. We understand, for instance, United Kingdom has more than 10 realms throughout the world. Some of those are very strong. Some of them are very weak. Because of the Chinese system, then each nation or realm doing trade with China, each individual nation or realm or kingdom, they are not going to give their resources in order to maintain the kingdom. They are going to be invested in the system. Human nature always wants to invest easily and receive more. It's a normal factor. Because of the abundance of the prosperity in the system, they are not going to be given their funding to maintain a subsystem where it's not required. So it's a normal factor. Plus then, the strong nations amongst these, they are not going to be given their funding to another weak nation. Simple fact of economics. Why? Because there is a neutral system extremely prosperous, where you do not have to have another United Kingdom because of this system. That's why then when Daniel stated that the kingdoms would be divided, there is a reason for it. You were understanding from an economical perspective, because Daniel was from the economical perspective. So then we find ourselves preparing then for the future when the system becomes available amongst the nations, amongst the kingdoms of the world. However, the kingdoms are not going to be divided. But then you have to understand the verbiage regarding the realms, or then nations united to make then a order, because there was no tabernacling back then. That's why you have the new world order, but those won't be used anymore. So then, besides these, there is another factor where then pushes for the division of the kingdoms. Why? Banking, investments, savings of the banks. We can expect, for instance, economics throughout the world always working in a skeleton status. What does it mean? The bare minimum, because people are going to try to avoid taxes. You understand, when the people begin to be prosperous, sometimes it enters in their head, and then they do whatsoever they can to invest their money. It's a normal factor. So then, funding from banks, where they have the savings and also the checking, whatsoever is superfluous in the system, as far as checking and savings, those are going to be invested. Because every time you invest your money on products, product line, you always receive, because the normal factor of the market always going up. So why would you have your savings then stuck in a bank where somebody else is going to do precisely what you can do in your own computer? But then you receive a tiny, minute fraction where you can receive 100%. So then systems always working in a skeleton status. And then, when this takes place, if the country found or realm found, if they don't have industry to circulate on real time value of production, value of the money related with the production, as used to be back in the old days, or then the gold standard, where you have to have production and equal value of the money printed. If these levels are not matched, then there is no amount of paper money that can satisfy the market or then the subsystem. And every time when governments, they are linked up with the system because they want to be prosperous also, then every time they invest, they receive, but then their expenses are far higher than what they're earning. Since they are linked up with the system, they are always in a negative. And then the system seizes up. Because you have to have real production, real gold value, real earning enough where then you can make a flow of economy. Anytime the earnings are below, then the computer seizes. You can't go any further, because the market always is up. You can't let then the funding go down the negative, otherwise you can't do trade. And unfortunately our country is so low. The debt is so huge. We can't match up with the market. So what is the solution? Well, the Messiah gave you the solution. We have to come up with an instant taxation system where then every person is then registered. Any person doing trade in the market should then pay taxes, because then it helps the government maintaining a balance where then yet in the future we can then have a chance of revitalizing our industry and then making sure we have a subsystem flow. The system is very delicate, but if we don't do what the Messiah said, give it to the government what belongs to them, and then God gods. He's explaining a simple factor of economics. So then we understand our government, for instance, working with those so many projects, but they are working with positive intentions with a negative value so far below it simply does not match. Whatsoever they think on doing, it won't match the market. Ever. Other than instant taxation, where then every person, either retailers or then individuals, already working with subsystems in our systems, such as eBay, Amazon, you name the other trade sites. When those are then registered and then real-time taxation is then deducted, then the huge numbers that we simply can't get out of, then they're going to be balanced. Because you have a specific computer over there deducting taxes. But then, these deducted taxes can't be mixed with our nation's debt. You have to work with both systems at the same time. You have to control absolutely what's coming from taxes versus what we are spending. Then an absolute control of expenses. For instance, the military. Travel of politicians. As far as the military is concerned, people that want to serve, they can serve, but they are not going to be flown around in the country. They have to find local people where those headquarters are at and find those workers near the area where the base is at in order not to spend. So we won't spend what is not required. You won't hire a person then from the East Coast and fly a person to the West. You hire a person from the West to do the work of the West. Every area, the military doesn't have to be top-notch. Meals can be simplified. When my time of the service was, though it was for a short time, it was absolutely lavished. It was nearly a 5-star hotel. I never saw this in my entire life. It is simply abundance that doesn't have to be there. If a person wants to eat beyond the basics, a person can purchase. But then the breakfast has 10 types of cereals, and then fruit, absolutely every kind, nearly. It is simply abusive. Has to have a control of those expenses. So then when this system then is placed aside and worked through and diminishing the costs, then whatsoever comes as taxation, very cautiously they must be matched. As far as parcels coming from other countries, we understand prior to coming to our shores, we must tax them, either individuals or retailers. They must be taxed per individual item. Has to have a calculation of how much then a person is going to place on a shelf for, and taxed and deducted. Each time a person then purchases, then taxes are deducted. He goes to the system of positive, yet working with another system at a very low negative. Then revitalizing our industry of the 50s. We understand trucking is going to be big. Mining equipment is going to be big. And we do have the expertise on how to work the system. Can be sure of it. Some of those places, South America for instance, Amazon or Africa, they're going to purchase the simplest and the most robust. for a long time. So the situation is truly dire, but then if we work properly and conscientiously, then we can come out of this crisis. But as it is, the government is going around in circles, because there is not a definite path of adjusting our subsystem until the system comes. As far as the realms or the United Kingdoms won't be required anymore because of the economics. So many realms around the world, then you have a subsystem generated because of these realms, then it's going to become expensive. Why? Because there is a partial link with a realm and another realm, where then the problem is going to be services. Services, when they are linked up, is going to be then deficient. Because when the main system comes, nations then, or realms, they're going to be investing. Since there is a link yet with the main kingdom, then there are services that are going to be neglected. It is a simple understanding of economics. Because the system coming is so easy, any kind of money you invest in it, you get a return. Much more so areas of the world where they order parcels and they are not delivered, boy, it's going to cause a lot of trouble. But it's a positive, what's the word, growth pains, a person might say. In other words, there is a factor of furthering in order to go on with construction and making sure they have enough space, then they have those areas where there are depots, either amplifying them or then extending them and doing the deliveries as such. Anytime when this huge ordering growth comes, then if the system is not prepared, they're going to be in a very dire straits. They're going to try to control the system because of taxation. They realize so many people ordering at the same time. It's going to come ships and aircrafts of products and also parcels. They won't have space and people to do the job. But then the parcels must be delivered, because you have then other areas of economics depending upon these items, because they are purchased to maintain, for instance, mining, for instance, other areas of generation of electricity. They're going to be ordered from overseas at first, because it's cheaper. In a lot of our own services, they're going to depend upon these parcels. But then the volume is going to be a problem. They won't have enough space in the depots for the demand. When the system then presents itself, the sq1 system of China, then even the government, they're going to be over there investing also. But then you have a shortage of people. Why would you have a shortage of people? Because a lot of the people, they are smart these days. They have put aside some funding and they're going to do investment. They're going to be constantly in a computer searching for products around the world where the most sold, then you're going to invest your money there, and invest and invest and invest, and then at the end of the month you receive then a tiny portion of it. But then if you multiply by 10,000, 100,000, 500,000, you get a nice paycheck. So let me ask you this: who wants to be a welder? You know, working in a dirty environment, squalid condition. You have to pay a lot to get a decent worker. Always is going to have shortage of workers. Every time, everywhere. Truckers are going to be paid top-notch money. Mining machine, probably double. But then we are working with the positives, understanding that our system then is matching up the market. So far our system is so far below, and we have a subsystem absolutely deficient. Because there is not a delineation of what we spent versus what we earn. But then when we set up the system where then every parcel coming to our country must be taxed, then you set aside this specific computer for the positive. And they must manage then the negative. And then generate more electricity, revitalizing our industry, and make sure people they get educated. Then I have to understand how they are going to do with the transfer of funding from institutions into the system and vice versa. How it's going to work with the mortgage system. They have put up some sort of a memo stating any kind of system related with mortgage must be paid with the money of the country where it is found at. It can't be paid with the foreign system. It is sound a bit strange because you have to specify what system, any system. So then you have a record of what's done. The rest of it is careful management of expenses, not to let the subsystem goes to negative. Every time it goes to the negative, you have to have enough on a positive to make it equal. Any mismatchment of these then causes the system to halt. Much more so if you do it automatic. Since we can't make automatic, we have to have the expenses of the country then aside. Every time there is a problem with the economy, you have to get rid of the weight of it. And it was said before, privatization is a must. You have to get rid of then agencies. You have to lean up the government. Military must be very lean. Regular squares. If you have a person that wants to serve in the military and has a health problem, no. With a health problem, you can't serve the government. Find another line of work. Find a healthy person, so then a person who has the squares of the day and not beyond. During my time of the service, in my country, any person with a problem, a physical problem, would not be selected. You have to be healthy to serve the military. Otherwise, then becomes a burden in the system and then causes a whole lot more problems. And there is no luxury at this point in time than to be selecting people sick to do military work. So then whatsoever headquarters then there is a requirement for certain workers, try to find where the headquarters is at. This situation of flying people back and forth in the nation has to stop. Because we have to control the negative so then we don't overwhelm the positive.